Our guests for this debrief of the Macron-Trump press conference, Paul Reen, Communications Vice President at Republicans in France. Thank you, sir, for being with us. On the other side of the studio, perhaps even politically opposed, I'm not sure, Lex Paulson, lecturer in rhetoric and human rights at Sciences Po. Lex, thanks for being with us. Next to Lex is Jeffrey Hawkins, former US ambassador to the Central African Republic. Jeff, thanks for being with us. And opposite Jeff is Philippe Carsanti, US expert, editor and elected representative at Neuilly-sur-Seine, just outside Paris. Nice place to be, Philippe. Thank you all for coming here. I will be quiet. You guys talk about what we've been listening to, and I'll throw it to you, this idea of France and US wanting a new deal on Iran. Paul.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm encouraged by what I just heard. Obviously, as an American in France, I'm happy that...
Trump called it the worst deal he's ever seen, didn't he? Terrible deal.
A lot of people have. A lot of Republicans have. And it is bad. I mean, I think what you're not hearing how bad it really was from a lot of people in Europe, a lot of people in the media. And he outlined some of the reasons. You know, sending them money, giving them the sunset clause. It doesn't, Obama used to always say that it stops the proliferation of nuclear arms in the Middle East. It doesn't do that. It kicks the can down the road. They're going to be able to build a bomb in 2025. They'll have be able to start enrich uranium again. In the meantime, they're just developing intercontinental ballistic missiles, improving their range, their guidance. All of these things are just going to lead to trouble in the Middle East. And that's why, and also all the money that they got to just, when we remove the sanctions, or most of them, to fund terrorism. So I was encouraged to see, which is what they're doing, and they're building up the military and all that, but I was encouraged to see that what Trump will always say is we got to get out. You know, he's a tough negotiator. But I think the end result will be trying to work with France, the UK, Germany, to create modifications to it.
The fingerprint of Iran, so. The fingerprint of Iran in terrorism throughout the region, Lex. That's what he was saying. Do you feel there's a genuine desire to move on, or is he just trying to kill the deal? How do you interpret what you?
Well, I think it's kind of brilliant as a tactical move. I mean, this is what you call in poker re-raising. Instead of debating the merits of the existing deal, well, let's get a bigger deal. Let's expand the playing field to encompass other issues, such as the ballistic missiles, such as longer-term assurances about nuclear capability, and such as situation in Syria. Now, you notice what he didn't say. Macron didn't say we're going to renegotiate the terms of the existing deal. He said we're going to broaden to include these other issues, which frankly don't materially change the deal on the table. They say, well, actually, here are some more things that we might be able to get from the Iranian regime. And especially in the situation in Syria, Macron is playing his best card that he is the only world leader that Trump has a personal rapport with, the strongest military power that America has teamed up with, not just in the Middle East, but also in West Africa and the Sahel. So I think Macron, by giving him the ability to keep his narrative, which is the deal is terrible, and yet, as we know, Trump doesn't really care about policy. So Macron is giving him a new set of wins by redefining the terms of the game.
Well, I tend to disagree. I mean, it was really the worst deal that could have been dealt by the administrations. So I'm really happy as a French elected official, as a French citizen, to see that my president is becoming pragmatic and trying to change things. And that's really a very good surprise today. I'm really, really happy.
But didn't it have to start somewhere? That was the whole point of the deal, wasn't it? It had to start at some place and then perhaps move on.
Well, not only that, but I mean, you're essentially holding the deal to a standard that it doesn't apply. I mean, the fact of Iranian regional behavior or their missile programs, while of great concern, have nothing to do with a deal that's designed to limit Iran's nuclear development. I thought Macron did an absolutely masterful job with this. You know, everyone was saying going into this that he would use his charm and sort of wheedle Trump into perhaps coming along on this agreement and in other areas. I think he's also used, as you mentioned, Lex, a pretty sophisticated negotiating technique, which is allowing him plenty of room to complain about the deal, but not scrap it entirely. The problem, of course, is that Trump is so mercurial, and you don't know how he's going to react long-term to any of these things, and he surrounded himself with people, notably John Bolton, his new national security advisor, who wrote an op-ed in the New York Times in 2015 saying we should bomb Iran. We don't know how those people are going to influence the president after Macron goes back to Paris.
Let's just listen quickly to what Trump was saying about Iran, just to remind you.
France and the United States also agree that Iran cannot be allowed to develop a nuclear weapon, and that regime must end its support of terrorism. All over, no matter where you go in the Middle East, you see the fingerprints of Iran behind problems.
Perhaps a slightly different discourse from Trump as you're hearing from Macron.
Yeah, but he's talking about facts. I mean, that's true that Iran, thanks to the deal, was able to have more money to support terrorism all over the world. So that's a real big step forward now to say now we're going back to the negotiation table. And if Iran is not ready to, move back, then they'll bomb them. And I'm sorry to tell you something, but Iran is disturbing the whole world, is supporting terrorism all over the world. And we're suffering from this. So I think it's really time to correct the terrible 8 Obama years we had in foreign policy, which completely destroyed. There was no ISIS before Obama. All of this was created because he supported the Muslim Brotherhood in one side and then some other extremist regimes in the Muslim world. So that's really important now to correct all these mistakes.
Come back on this side of the table, please.
What was very interesting, though, I'm not really going to spend a lot of time debating the Obama years, but I think what's really interesting now is that Trump didn't just say, we're going to take the side of our traditional Sunni allies against the Shia power on. He actually, in a sense, gave a threat to both sides. He said that there are wealthy countries. When you hear wealthy countries in the Middle East, of course, you think of the major Sunni powers in the Gulf. So he's not saying he's going to recalibrate away from the perceived Obama favoritism toward the Shia against the Sunni authorities, but rather saying we want a sustainable solution based on powers in the region, Sunni and Shia, increasing their commitments, increasing their responsibilities for security. And I think it allows, again, Trump to play this sort of nativist, we're not going to intervene card, which Macron echoed, but it also allows Macron to, in a sense, cool down potentially what could be the anti-Iranian takeaway from this exercise.
But you should be happy because it's balanced. He's not really siding with the Sunnis. He's saying, look, both of you have to work. We have to all work together to work for the world peace, and that's fine for me.
He talked about $7 trillion being spent in the Middle East to get peace. Is that right, that he should make the other kingdoms pay?
Well, the problem with all of these things is we never know whether the president is speaking from a well-developed policy that went through the interagency process and has everyone in the government contribute, or whether he's just making this up there. And to call on regional powers to help finance a comprehensive peace deal in the Middle East, not great. But you got to get the deal first. And there's no evidence at this point that such a thing exists. If we're talking about some sort of military intervention by regional powers, replacing U.S. forces in Syria or other places with regional forces who have their own favorites in a highly charged, very complicated sectarian situation, I see that as a potential for disaster.
And that, of course, another area where Macron and Trump disagree, isn't it? Obviously, Macron would prefer to keep the troops there.
I think it's funny that it's so easy to criticize Trump and say, oh, he has no policy, he doesn't know what he's talking about, who knows what he's going to do next. He has said he's going to do certain things in the past year, and he's done them. He said he was going to attack ISIS and destroy them. He's done it. And he said he was going to create a greater alliance with the Arab countries. He's done it. His first trip overseas was to Saudi Arabia. What he's talking about is getting Saudi Arabia, the rich Arab countries who've been sitting back and watching the U.S. and France and UK spend trillions of dollars in the Middle East, getting them United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt. This is an alliance that the U.S. actually has funded and trained their militaries. Why can't they spend a little time, some of their air power, hopefully some ground troops, that's going to be the question, to go in and do the work so that France and the U.S. can keep advisors and maybe just air power and make a difference there.
Before you pick up on that, let's listen to Emmanuel Macron talking on the same issue, Iran.
We want to start working on a new Iran deal. Nous devions I repeatedly said that together we need to find a new framework. By working with regional powers and with the Iranian leadership, we can succeed in finding a new agreement. I hope we can get started on this new path in the weeks and the months to come.
And he went on to talk about 4 pillars of this New Deal, didn't he? It was current nuclear activity after 2025, ballistic missiles, and influence across the region. What you've been talking about, what Iran is doing in different places.
I think there's an interesting analogy here to the border wall situation, where Trump had presented this narrative of building a wall. Now, what is a wall? Well, a wall can be defined in different ways. So in the same way, you know, and we've seen, oh, well, there's this plexiglass thing that he's going to Texas, and he's saying, well, we're building this wall. So as long as Trump has his story, which is that he's torn up the bad deal and he's negotiating a new deal, Macron can work with that because, you know, as Jeff pointed out, there are some neoconservatives in his administration or pure hawks who would like to blow up Tehran, but there are people who really just want the story. And as long as Trump can say we are starting over and coming up with a new deal, then he preserves his narrative. He is able to talk to his Fox News base, and Macron can actually do the hard, heavy lifting on the policy side.
Must be talking to his country, not the Fox News base. I mean, watch his body language. I mean, they were touching to each other. I mean, it was incredible. They are really on the same page. I mean, I can tell you, as a French elected official, I see exactly where we're going. Everybody was electing Macron and we're thinking, oh, we're going to have something to balance Trump. No, he's going to be siding with Trump on these issues, and I think that's great. And, you know, when you look at all what did Trump, you know, with North Korea, in Israel and everything, he's really following his policy. He has a real policy. Putting the embassy to Jerusalem was such a great move. I mean, look, Obama said, I will do it. Clinton did it. Everybody said, and now they did it. He did it. Well, so he's following his policy.
They haven't done it yet, but...
well, I'm sorry. It's
the Palestinians disagree. I've got to say that.
Yeah, but
I have to say that.
But they had the press release. That's the point. They got the story. They didn't actually move the embassy, but they got the story.
It's in 3 weeks.
And also,
it's May 14th. I mean, that's amazing.
I would say this idea of Macron and Trump being on the same page, they did an admirable job, both of them, in presenting a fairly united front in front of the cameras. But, I mean, Macron goes in there with a lot of contentious issues. They didn't talk much about the trade issue, which is, of course, very important and is about to come up next week. They didn't even bother to really, I mean, Macron mentioned it, but they didn't even bother to mention climate change, which is hugely important for France, and France has provided leadership there. And so there are so many areas where President Macron and President Trump are not in agreement, and where they just have to gloss over it in these.
Well, there's going to be.
Philippe. Yeah, I'm sorry. Climate change and trade issues are not the main problem of the world now. We're having Iran,
I would disagree with that.
I'm sorry, but Iran is really killing people everywhere in the world. They're supporting terrorism everywhere in the world. What's going on in the area and everywhere in South America and everywhere. They're putting money on all the terrorist groups. That's really important now. They are dealing with the main issues. I'm telling you something. Having no more fresh air in a century is maybe a problem. But now we're talking about next week. We're talking about tomorrow. And Trump is dealing with what we're dealing now in the Middle East and in the rest of the world.
Probably. I mean, we don't know all that they've discussed. I'm sure Macron probably brought up those points. They just didn't bring them up in the press conference. but you know, I agree that there's certain things that Macron will be able to convince Trump to change his views on, and other things he's not going to be able to change his views on. He's not going to be able to get him back into the Paris Climate Agreement, I don't think. But I'm very encouraged, again, that, you know, Macron, in a sense, is representing the EU. And if we're going to make any headway, proper progress on the Iran deal, UK and Germany have to be involved. I mean, Russia and China are also involved, but they're going to stay on the outside and see. If we can get UK, France, Germany, and the US to convince Iran that we are going to pull out unless there's these changes, then maybe something can happen.
We have, by way of changing subject a little, a quote from Donald Trump pre-press conference talking about trade.
The trade with France is complicated because we have the European Union. I would rather deal just with France. The Union is very tough for us. They have trade barriers that are unacceptable. Our farmers can't send their product into the European Union easily as they should, and we accept their product, so we have to make a change.
Moving on to talk about trade, we can go back to any other issue. It's not one of those debates where you stop, move on, because it's the way it is. It's the way it is with Trump. He'll say one thing, it links into something else and something else. So it's good, you know. But this issue of trade, and obviously you heard that from Donald Trump there. It's difficult dealing with the EU. He says he wants to deal directly with France.
Yeah,
you guys, go on.
Look, I think it's again a wonderful card for Macron to play that there's only a 2% trade deficit between the U.S. and France. It's really the only thing that Trump can always return to. This question of reciprocity, this question of are we getting the bad end or the good end of the deal? The fact is, the European Union by raising standards for food products that are coming from America, or by raising data protection standards and making it less profitable for tech platforms to sell their services to the U.S. or sell their advertising. These are things that I think European people are very much in favor of, that Macron has spoken in favor of, things like data protection, things like food standards, things that are broadly popular here. And the fact is that this is an area that he doesn't have to go to war with Donald Trump because he can hide behind Brussels a bit. I think for the moment, there are bigger issues at play. And if he can have a happy détente on this issue of trade, I think Macron will take it.
I'd be really happy that, I'm a French citizen. And I would like to Macron make France great again, as Trump wants to make America great again. So we're fighting, we're defending our own interest, and that's different. We have different interests. No, that's a negotiation. I'm on Macron's side, of course, but I respect Trump's willingness to defend Americans' interests.
Even on this one, though, I would say that what you said earlier, Alex, about the narrative being so much more important than the substance. I mean, the trade, the protectionism, making America strong, and all that is such a deep part of the Trump campaign and the Trump presidency. But when you get right down to it, on this thing, he's actually going to be hurting his base in many ways, and particularly when you look at agricultural products and key agricultural states and all the rest. Already, you see a little bit of wavering on that, giving exemptions to the NAFTA countries while they figure that out. This might be when he
steel and aluminum, So there is bigger. The U.S. has a massive, over $300 billion deficit with China, and he's talking about Europe. I mean, I'm not a real big fan of tariffs, to be straightforward. But only in cases where, like, China has been having 25% tariffs on U.S. cars for years. Any businessman around the table knows how difficult it is to do business in China. You have to open plants in China to avoid the tariffs. And what Trump promised, his base and during his campaign was to get manufacturing jobs in the United States. So working out something with China, I understand. Worrying about the European Union and France, I think I hope that is just an exempt. They agreed to exempt Europe and
exempt Europe because these tariffs are aimed at China, aren't they? I presume.
Sure. I mean, you look at what the business community in the U.S. are saying right now. I mean, it's very hard to do a targeted tariff. This is how the Hawley-Smoot tariff in 1930 blew up into a global trade war. Is that as long as as long as the business community sees the ties between, well, you're giving this favor to this person, why can't I have exempt one more thing to buy votes on Capitol Hill? So, I mean, I think the business community will ultimately get Trump's ear, as they have on the tax cuts and other issues, and finally the trade war hopefully will die down before it gets any bigger.
So, are you turn on tariffs?
China, though. China's
a U-turn on tariffs, you think? A U-turn for Trump on tariffs? Would you predict that?
Well, not on China, not with China. No, it's going to be country by country. The fact that he did it by product for the moment, and which affects everyone. I mean, there's some steel and aluminum imported from Europe, but not a tremendous amount, really.
Philippe.
Well, I'm optimistic on these issues. Because, I'm also a businessman, apart from being a political elected French guy. I mean, I think it's really important. Each and every country is defending its own interest. And what America has been enduring against China for all these decades has to be stopped in a way or another. I mean, and it's time. And Europe, again, I'm a French citizen, so you're putting me in a strange situation because I really want to defend France, but I understand also why Donald Trump wants to be the president of the United States, whereas Barack Obama was the president of the world. And that's why he really made America low.
Jeffrey.
Yeah.
Final word. Beat that.
Final word on that. Well, I think it'll be very interesting to see what President Trump finally gives to President Macron as he returns to Paris. There were a lot of allusions to things and some good talk, and there was that moment where Trump almost seemed to be winking at President Macron, where he said,
he knows.
Well, you know what I'm going to do, but nobody else does. Watch this show, the ratings will go up, that kind of thing.
Stay tuned.
Macron needs something from this visit, and it remains to be seen what he's going to walk away with.
It is time, sadly, for us to end this discussion, discussion of Macron and Trump, day 2 of the state visit, of course, and it continues. There's a big dinner tonight, and I could wow you with the menu. It's going to be really good.
Rack of lamb.
Rack of lamb, different types of wines. Who knows what it'll be? Great stuff. Paul, thank you. Thank you to Philippe. Thank you to Alex and to Jeffrey. Thank you most of all to you for watching. Do stay with us here in France 24. More to come.